What's up, and welcome into the DePaul Hoops podcast with the great Andy Thompson. I'm Nick Palazzolo here on the Big East Energy Network, and we have a lot to unpack here. We're going to start with the women's basketball side. A very unusual roster move, let alone for the second month of the season. We'll talk about that. We will talk about their recent stretch of games. We'll also talk about DePaul on the men's side, just absolutely dismantling Morgan State. And we will preview DePaul and Wichita State. All of that and more is coming up next.
McAdoo look to his shot.
Spins, fade away. Yes, sir. Chandler hits the three.
Oh, tough shot. Giving it up to Reed.
Well, Andy, this morning we both got a press release in our email, and I had to read it about four times, and then I had to text somebody, and I was like, am I reading this properly? So do you want to go ahead and tell us what's going on with DePaul women's basketball?
Yeah, so I found out myself. The press release came in at about 10 a.m., but busy morning at work for me, so I found out at about 10:45, actually via your tweet. And I had to do about a quadruple take like you did, because what I read from your tweet and subsequently when I checked my email from the press release was DePaul women's basketball adds 4-year volleyball player Katelynn Oxley to the roster effective immediately. I'm sure there's examples in other sports, I would imagine, like softball and some other ones, but it feels pretty unprecedented, at least to me, that a volleyball player would be added to DePaul basketball's roster, let alone, like you mentioned in the intro, in the second week. So it's like a month of a season. So they did add, effective today, Katelynn Oxley, who is 6'4", and will be playing, I believe, one season of basketball based on how NCAA rules work. In her 4 seasons with volleyball, per the press release, she appeared in 106 matches for the Blue Demons. And this season, she averaged 1.12 blocks per set, which ranks 6th in the conference. And she also had a .318 hitting percentage that ranked 8th in the country. Now, I will admit, I don't know a whole lot about volleyball compared to basketball. I would imagine you don't either, but I do understand this much. To be able to block, to be able to get a block in volleyball, you've got to be able to stay almost perfectly vertical, because you can have your hands over the net, but the second your hands touch the net, the point goes to the other team. So given that this team, just as a result of how the roster is constructed with some of the conditioning of some of the players because of injuries, this team has had, in the past couple of games, several instances of, some of the key front court players fouling out as early as like midway through a third quarter, late into a third, or like just early in the fourth, and they're just trying to get momentum, but just are struggling to stay vertical against some of the more physical post players in the league. So I think, obviously, because she's literally joining the team as of today, and I presume these conversations have taken place over the past few weeks, that we haven't known about, I don't imagine there's been a whole lot of practice, if at all, really, with the team for Oxley. But I would imagine they're looking at her as somebody who can, for now at least, give you spot minutes and play a more vertical center position for you. And I think the other thing that could be interesting for her is, obviously, you've got to have a little bit of a vertical in volleyball. Not that any of the players we have right now don't already in the front court, but to be able to get up for a block the way you have to be able to, especially the Big East level, where there's consistently teams going far into the NCAA tournament, like Creighton, sometimes teams like Marquette, Villanova, all those teams. You've got to be able to get up for that block. So to have somebody who, at least on paper, should offer, reasonable blocking ability, verticality, that's a promise for this team. The other thing that stuck out to me from the podcast, and excuse me, from the press release, it's been a long day. We're doing the podcast. We read the press release. Let's get it together.
It's currently 10:30 on Wednesday night, and you guys will all be watching this on Friday, so bear with us.
Yeah, it's been we haven't had our coffee tonight. We played 2 seasons of varsity basketball at her high school in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she led her team in points, blocks, and rebounds. in her junior and senior campaigns, and her teams went, according to the presser, 45-7 in 2 seasons, and she finished top 3 in the state, or her team finished top 3 in the state back-to-back in for junior and senior year. Now, what sticks out to me across both her basketball stats, which obviously we can't find much of online, but when you go 45-7, you're doing something right. And then in volleyball, to be top 10 in multiple statistical categories in volleyball. Clearly, she is a player across multiple sports who contributes to winning. And I think, that's something that as this women's team has kind of had inconsistent availability with players all year, as they're a much younger team that's kind of trying to come together, to have another voice who's just going to be able to come in as a 4-year veteran, albeit in volleyball, not basketball, and has seen like a lot of high pressure moments, like some big game moments. I think it's just, she'll be able to be, I don't want to say like a Brandon Macklin player in terms of her energy, because I highly doubt anybody can replicate his energy. That's just not possible. But in terms of just being a veteran presence in the room who can kind of like help the players, like, get, we're a month into the season, but you get what I'm trying to say. Just like get the players like, just be like another coach on the floor. I think she's going to be huge in that role as well. And it's just going to be good for this team to have somebody else with more of a veteran mindset versus, like, obviously you've got a lot of redshirt freshmen getting minutes. You've got Natalia Nelson's a true sophomore. You've got a lot of key players for this team who are just super, super young. And so I think having somebody else who's the equivalent of a 4th year coming in and being able to just kind of add more to this team is going to be crucial for them.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about this is as soon as this kind of came through, and I read it 4 or 5 times.
Same.
I texted somebody who would know, and I was like, okay, what else am I missing? Because usually when a move like this happens, you always think, there's something wrong with the current roster, some level of injuries, or to where they just need bodies type of thing. Um, and from what I was told, like there's no injuries at the forward position that would, warrant anything that requires an adding. Again, that was something that you and I will definitely ask Jill Pizzotti, um, you know, after the UMass Lowell game.
Which you guys will find out
But
about. The results of that game will have happened by the time this show comes out. To give an idea of kind of where our schedules are at, we could not get it to work to come out after the game. So apologies in advance.
yeah, and it's just like one of those things where it's just fascinating because, like I said, you deal with one of these, these unprecedented type of moves, but then you're like, okay, what else? Because like the journalist in me is like, okay, what else is at play? Because there's some other things where you can kind of read some tea leaves. You have some of the story, but you don't have all of it. This kind of came all the way out of left field, and I was like, okay, so what am I missing? And I was told you're not missing anything. Like she's just added to the roster. So that makes it even more fascinating to a team that frankly has been struggling offensively. They've lost their last their last 5, I believe. The last win was against Grambling State on the 21st. But just, you know, out of their last 4 games, the women's basketball team has not scored more than 54 points. 49, 41, 54, 35 against UConn.
On the road
Again,
at UConn on
yeah,
Super Jersey retirement day. That just,
yeah,
you're
they're
not going to
just
get many shots off in an
it,
environment like that.
yeah, it's not even that. It's like you're just you gotta gotta find a way to just try to. They're just struggling offensively. And I think Pizzotti has mentioned in the past, like they're just playing way too fast. So it'll be interesting to kind of see as they hit the stretch of 3 more non-cons um, before Big East play starts. UMass Lowell, Michigan State at UIC. Those are your final 3 non-cons on the women's side. But the men's side, they go on and they have a huge road test on Saturday against Wichita State, against the Shockers, a game that was one of the best environments at Wintrust last year, probably of the seasons. It was a Saturday afternoon, early afternoon tip, I believe, from what
Yes,
I remember. That feels like so long ago.
it was.
But before we get into that, let's talk about Morgan State. Andy DePaul kind of runs away with that one, 92-49. Morgan State only put 11 field goals in the basket. Everything was working for DePaul offensively and defensively. Just a really good effort out of the Demons.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's most important to mention, just to give an idea of the game flow, is, DePaul they did come out, obviously relative to opponent, they came out really strong defensively the first couple minutes. Just, he had a starting lineup yesterday of Teo, NJ, Layden, RJ, and Cruz. I would say that's probably one of your better defensive lineups at the moment. I mean, obviously Holtman is also trying to get Cruz into the starting lineup, get him that experience, but his defense, I would say, is coming along overall. He had he had 2 steals yesterday and was forcing turnovers in other ways as well. But, the thing that obviously you got to look at is Morgan State, for as much as we were forcing them into turnovers and they finished the game with 20, they also opened the game shooting 0 of 19 from the field. Like, there was a point in the game where I looked up because I wasn't obviously paying attention to each individual make, because I'm looking at the game through a camera lens. I'm on the baseline shooting
Literally.
photos. So I'm not seeing the entire play. I'm focusing half the time. I'm not looking for if the shot goes in from the opposing team. I'm just focusing on, like, okay, who do I think's going to get the ball, trying to get that next shot ready. So during one of the media timeouts, I think it might have been the under 8 at that point, I'm looking up at the scoreboard and I'm like, wait, are there technical difficulties? Because DePaul says like 50% from 3, 60% from the field. It says 0% for both categories in Morgan State. And so I went on real quick. I just looked up the stat broadcast because I don't always obviously have that up. And I was like, no, they're 0 of like 16 from the field right now. That's just insane. Like, obviously, look, DePaul was playing good defense. A part of that's also just horrible shooting luck and just bad shooting variance for them. And then they come out in the second half. They do shoot 9 of 27, and they got 24 of their 49 points at the free throw line. So obviously that's a team that, as they get into MEAC play, that's going to be a team that is going to be able to get to the foul line at just a ridiculous rate, which is going to be good for them later. But speaking of DePaul's free throws, obviously there's only so much you can take away beyond this being a confidence boost for DePaul on the men's side. But I did like, one of the things I liked in this game was you had 3 guys shoot at least 7 free throws, and all of them made at least 6 of those 7. Teo Pierre Justin, 6 of 8, Layden Blocker, 7 of 7, Caleb Banks, 8 of 8. And even though obviously it wasn't that much of a high pressure game, because there was pretty much never a point after the first couple minutes where DePaul was down more than 15-20, which again, that's just as much our defense as it is Morgan State's. Just one of the weirdest shooting nights I've ever seen in my life, in person or on TV. Just ridiculous. But I like that this team is showing real improvement at the free throw line, because early on in the season, like in some of the exhibitions, and also just the early season games against like Chicago State, Stonehill, Buffalo, I mean, you're shooting maybe 50% from the free throw line, and some of those games like 60%, if that. But to go 29 of 37 in this game, in a game where just a lot of guys needed to get their confidence back, I thought that was big, and that's one of the few things that I think is going to be able to carry over ideally from this game. But Nick, what was another area that you kind of thought, because you talked about this earlier, what was one of the things that you thought you can take away from this game in either direction?
Well, to your point, Andy, because the first question I asked Holtman post game was, you had guys struggling with confidence, like just how important was it to have a game like this before you go to Wichita State and play the Shockers, great environment. Then you travel to St. John's and play at Carnesecca for the Big East opener. Like, those are 2 not easy road environments to go play in. And he started, with, your coach speak answer, like it was important, right? But then he went into something like almost like a lot deeper than I was really, really into. I was expecting a full coach speak answer out of him.
No, this was not coach speak at all.
And he was talking about agendas, and not political agendas, just like personal agendas.
Not at the time.
And sorry. But he was talking about, players kind of using their own agenda to help the team instead of using their own agenda to help themselves. And I thought that was really interesting. And like, that's one of those things where you look at it and you're thinking to yourself as that answer is being given. you look at it and it's like, why is he saying this? Like, it's one of those things like Holtman kind of went out of his way to say, um, about it as I'm trying to pull up the full quote. He's like, I think in our game, this is a quote from directly from Holtman. I think in our game and in sports in general, one of the hardest things to do is to play with a free mind. When players play with a free mind and with no agenda, we talk about playing agendaless basketball. There is no other agenda right now in their minds outside of them helping their teammates slash brothers play as well as they can in that possession. Play without any other agenda. When you play with an agenda, you lose yourself in the team, you lose yourself in what your team needs, but playing without an agenda, it frees you up to play your best. And I thought that was really interesting because he was, again, I don't want to say he was taking a shot and using the media to do it, but he was also saying like there were some players he thought were making business decisions. And by business decisions, not playing team basketball. So like that was probably the most notable thing that I took away from the Morgan State game outside of just the rebounding discrepancies overall 39-33 in favor of the Bears of Morgan State, but 21 offensive rebounds that the Bears secured. I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite like it.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say that DePaul didn't obviously struggle on the offensive glass all night, but I am going to chalk a bit of that up to the extreme variance of like, look, you missed 44 shots. Like, obviously, DePaul should be there for a lot more of them because Morgan State is one of the shortest teams in the country. You're one of the tallest teams in the Big East and in Power Conference basketball in general. You should be there for a lot more of those boards, but for me, it isn't so much the fact that Morgan State won offensive rebounding, because that's typically probably going to happen when, DePaul's only got 21 misses to rebound and they're shooting well from 3 and 2. And Morgan State is obviously shooting, 20% from the floor, 18% from 3. Those rebounds are going to be there. It's the fact that they got tripled up and DePaul only had 7. That's it for me. NJ Benson in 12 minutes had 1. Jeremy Lorenz in 13 minutes had 2 offensive rebounds. Kamon Maker in 15 minutes had 2 offensive rebounds, and there were 2 of them that went to the team as well. So you got 7 in total. Morgan State has 7 team rebounds. So in terms of like players actually grabbing them, it was technically 14-5, which again is not a great ratio there. But you talked about having agendaless basketball there, and I wanted to highlight something that Holtman said later on that kind of connected to that point when I asked him about Ilya, Ilya has had the highest combined plus minus on the team of the past 2 games. He's a plus 41 in his past 2 outings in total. And in this game, he was 2 of 5 from 3, had 3 rebounds, 3 assists, two steals, and just 1 turnover. And he also had a deflection that became another steal for somebody else. I forget who it was attributed to, but he got the deflection. Somebody else got the ball. I've been impressed with his defense for the most part. Like, obviously, towards the end of the first half, he isn't used to playing that much yet. Still got to get his legs under him. So there were 1 or 2 times he got sort of blown by a little bit. But his defense is already light years ahead of where it was in opening night, where even against like Chicago State and against Stonehill, he was just not able to stay in front of his guy. He wasn't really able to kind of funnel people into the front court as guard trying to get inside. But he was like really doing a good job staying on ball last night. He was being handsy, but in the right way, not like fouling. He was actually like getting his hands in there, trying to take the ball, being smart about it. The offense is always going to be there, but as he gets more comfortable in a defensive flow for this team, I think he is really going to be a crucial player for us in some of these later Big East games where if you need instant offense and you don't want the defense to drop off too much, he is looking like a much better option now than he did even a week ago, I would say, against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and Holtman kind of mentioned this post game as well. Just the differences. He's like he didn't even know like how to check in, and sub in.
I don't
Like
remember this, by the way. I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can find that. I don't remember this, being an issue live, but maybe I'm just forgetting.
yeah, but it was just one of those things. There's like Ilya is going to play a big portion of what this DePaul team can be, especially from the perimeter. Because you take a look at Brandon Macklin, right, not playing. they probably expect him back, kind of as I said either last episode or a couple episodes ago. I think the goal is Wichita State or St. John's. I think it's one
Yeah.
of those two. And they're dealing with some injuries, which we can get to in a minute here. But Ilya just again a plus 26. Like, I don't remember his plus minus early in the season or in the exhibitions, but like it was bad.
Yeah, no, it was like
It,
-10, -20. There was one game, like I think one of the buy games, early buy games, it might have been like -25. Like he's just
yeah,
completely turned himself around in the last month
yeah, and
on the
I think
defensive
that's
end
just
specifically.
and I think for him, he's been able to just kind of get used to it. Like I think he's just getting more and more comfortable. Not so much with the basketball, but just in life. Like he's moving to a different country, right? To a city he's never really been to outside of, hearing good things about the wonderful city that is Chicago. But it's just one of those things where I think as the year goes on and he starts to grow and gets more and more comfortable and more confident, he's going to be a big part to this team. And I think we talked about it on the last episode with front court depth. That depth is being tested right now. No Fabian Flores as he was dealing with just I think, some neck soreness. And Brandon Macklin without the shoulder. Again, I understand that Macklin is not a forward. But again, the length he can kind of bring to your lineup and kind of just that mentality he brings, I think kind of plays with the rotations a little bit. NJ Benson rolled his ankle apparently in the Pine Bluff game. He checked out of the Morgan State game.
Having done the
As
same thing.
yeah, just kind of re-aggravating it. So we'll just kind of see what that looks like. But Caleb Banks is going to be a big part, and he kind of had his breakout game. Against Morgan State. Again, 8 of 8 from the free throw line, 18 points, 4 rebounds. I would have liked to see those rebound numbers get up, especially with the 21 chances that Morgan State had offensively. Um, but this is an interesting time as they had to take on a Wichita State team which is a solid group, and they're much better than what they were last year.
No, for sure. I mean, I'll kind of highlight this before I talk a bit more about just roster stuff, and then we can go full preview into Wichita State. But, you talk about the thing that's glaring for me and why the offensive rebounding margin is concerning for me is Wichita State is a top 20 offensive rebounding team in the country. It's one of the things they do best. They get 39.5% of their opportunities on the offensive glass they grab. And for DePaul to be down, be tripled up by a team that ranks bottom 5 in KenPom is not the most promising sign there. So you hope guys like Caleb, like Teo, Jeremy when he comes in, who, Jeremy plays limited minutes, but I think he's one of our strongest offensive rebounders right now. I think love it or hate it, like that's the truth. He generally, when he gets offensive rebounds, he's able to find the right guys on the perimeter, make the right plays happen more often than not. So you'd love to see him do more in the offensive rebounding category, but he's at least getting himself in the place to be able to get them. NJ is always going to have some for you. We hope he's able to play. And I think Fabian's going to be one of the big swing factors there. It would also help to have Brandon back because, as you highlighted, he is not a forward, but currently go through the team rebounding averages. NJ Benson, 6.9. Brandon Macklin, second, 4.0. Fabian Flores, third with 3.6. Don't know if he's going to play. CJ Gunn, 3.4. Then Teo with 2.9. Banks, 2.5. Those are your top 6 rebounders. And RJ Smith, 2.5 as well, but he's listed as 7th because of how ESPN ties things alphabetically. So, excuse me. Those are your offensive rebounders. Those are your rebounders right now. So to have Brandon back is going to be crucial on the glass just in terms of this team kind of getting some of its pop back there. I want to go back to Ilya for 2 seconds, then we'll transition to Wichita, because one thing I didn't mention earlier is the reason I brought him up after you brought up the agendaless basketball thing is Holtman kind of said that I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he more or less said, there's not a thing that goes through that kid's mind except helping the team win, whether you play in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. When he told me that, I was like, okay, he obviously is going to be playing Ilya a lot more now the defense is visibly coming around a bit. Because even against LSU, I think I mentioned the last episode, he forced a guy nearly out of bounds off the sideline, and that guy had to call a timeout, and it was one of the starters. It wasn't like it was a deep bench guy. Like, he was forcing LSU starters, even down 30, into tough situations. He's clearly able to do it against most opponents, regardless of skill level. So that's encouraging. But he's obviously going to be playing Ilya a lot more, because after he brought up that kind of agendaless basketball point about the general team, he highlighted with Ilya how he's one of the best examples on the team of just not having an agenda. And I'm wired to come in, play 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however many minutes, and just play winning basketball as best he can. And that's something that this team needs, kind of that spark right now, no matter what level of competition they're playing.
Yeah, and I think again he's gonna be vital, and you hate to kind of frame it this way, but Brandon Macklin's injury was the best thing for Ilya, because those were minutes that had to go somewhere. In the last couple of nights, they've gone to Ilya, and he's certainly proven and shown that he can start to handle, again, a step up in class this upcoming Saturday against Wichita State, certainly. But just to be able to kind of get out there, again, you're not going to get better by sitting on the bench. Holtman has said that. I think any coach in America will say that. The only way you get better is by playing. And I think like he will just be very, very vital going forward here.
No, for sure. Now let's kind of get into Wichita State here. So I mentioned that they're one of the top teams in the country in offensive rebounding. But this is a team that, Holtman was adamant last season that he does not believe they are a mid-major team. Like, Charles Koch Arena is one of the best venues and one of the toughest road venues in the country at any level in the sport. Obviously, Wichita State isn't quite what they were about a decade ago when they were, a consistent threat to go deep into the tournament and make Final Four runs. But Paul Mills has things pointing up there, and I believe his 4th season there. And, Wichita State has played. All of their losses have come by 6 points or fewer, and their losses are 3-point loss to Boise State, 5-point loss to St. Mary's, which to me says a lot because that's one of the toughest defenses in the country, 6-point loss to Colorado State, and 5-point loss to Western Kentucky, who was always a frisky team in Conference USA. So they're not taking any blowout losses, and in a lot of their wins, they're beating teams up. They've got a 43-point win over Prairie View A&M, 20-point win over Loyola Chicago, nearly 20-point win over Milwaukee, and they're doing it in a variety of ways. Their 2-point percentage is actually among bottom 100 or so in the country, but they don't really turn the ball over that much. They have a high block rate offensively. They are a pretty good free throw shooting team, about 72% on the season, but they've got multiple perimeter players who are dead eyes from beyond the arc. I think that's going to be, there's a lot of ways this team can kill you, whether it's with blocking you on the defensive end or just piling on offense in bunches. Nick, what are some of the areas you think this team is going to test us in the most?
Yeah, I think just before I get to that point, I think it's also interesting as they just have coming off a 5-point road win against Northern Iowa. This team hasn't played in a week. Like, their previous game before DePaul on Saturday the 13th will be Saturday the 6th. Like, they have a full week off. So this Wichita State team is going to come in very rested. As Andy just kind of rattled off the numbers there, but like defensively, this is a top 90 defense, and I understand they're like, oh, top 90, right? Not exactly, in an elite level of defense, but it's still a promising thing. And I think if you remember last year, the way DePaul really took over that game was perimeter shooting. They kind of just shot themselves out of a cannon in the second half against Wichita State, and just everything they wanted to do just kept working and working in the South Loop last year. And when you take a look at this matchup more closely, like especially for DePaul, right? This is their first true road test. Like, I understand you went down to Destin for the ECC, but also like, you know, uh, there's no real environment that can There's no simulations. There's nothing you can do to really prepare yourself, let alone have it be your first road environment. Like coming off like a road game again, I guess their best road game was Notre Dame. Their only real road game was Notre Dame in a sense, but that also they treated it like an exhibition. They drove out to South Bend day of. They came right back after the game. There was no shoot around, no hotel. Like they just literally took a bus, it was a day trip, go there, come back. So like this is their first road test, their first time doing it. So it'll be curious to see, in the couple days leading up to it, before they fly out on Friday, like how is this team going to respond to the road environment? Because I think last year against Texas Tech, it was really ugly early. Like Texas Tech went on some kind of an insane run. DePaul was able
14-0
to,
run, yeah.
yeah, and then DePaul kind of got their bearings last year. And I think I don't remember. I think Holtman said like he kind of underestimated that first game on the road last year. And this is just a good measuring test just because what is going to translate on the road in Wichita on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of, we talked about obviously how DePaul has little margin for error on the glass, where you've got Brandon Macklin is second leading rebounder, getting 4 a game. Wichita State has 4 guys who average five rebounds or more. The highest being Will Berg, who's a Purdue transfer, played in all 10 games for them. 7.7 points, 7.7 boards, team high 1.3 blocks. He is only shooting 60% from the free throw line, so not the strongest there, but we also have a couple guys in the front court who struggle a little bit. But they also have guys averaging 6.2, 5.2, and then they have a Seton Hall transfer, Emmanuel Okorafor, who's averaging 5.1 boards and 1.2 blocks a game. And the thing that I look at, too, is last year, DePaul was able to kill Wichita State with their perimeter shooting. And this year, I think, unfortunately, it might be the other way around, where for as much as Caleb Banks has obviously been, one of the best shooters on the team, having Brandon Macklin out in this game is going to hurt you in multiple ways because he is one of our best perimeter shooters. And the thing that Wichita State has that DePaul right now, just because of how the offense has been flowing, they don't necessarily have, they have perimeter depth. They have 3 guys shooting greater than 40% on the season, specifically Michael Gray Jr., 42%, Kenyon Giles, who I already mentioned, shooting 41.3%, and then Caron Boyd shooting 40% exactly. You do have Cruz. Let me take a look real quick at DePaul's shooting numbers. I just haven't refreshed them since last night. I know Caleb Banks is probably going to be around 40 because he was 2 of 3. But real quick, let's just do a a comparison of where DePaul's at. So right now we have 2 guys shooting over 40, Caleb Banks at 41.4 and Cruz McClure at 41.2. Then Brandon Macklin is 36.8 and Ilya is 33.3, although I think that's due for some aggression to the mean because obviously he just hasn't been playing as many minutes till these past few games, and so it's just hard to get into a flow when you're coming in for 2 minutes and coming out. So I think Ilya's numbers are better than the season average indicates, but still, Wichita State has a lot more reliable shooting depth right now than DePaul does, and so I don't think DePaul, especially on the road in an environment that not only is it a tough environment, that fan base, I don't know if you went on Twitter much after that game last year, but that fan base is going to remember how DePaul just shredded them in the second half. And even though, looking back at the replay, some of the highlights, it didn't seem like we were being, overly dirty. Their fan base was just convinced that DePaul was playing super dirty. So that's going to be a more raucous crowd than even it would be anyway, just because of the home court advantage there. And I just think that the way DePaul was able to win last year isn't necessarily going to be mutually exclusive to DePaul. I think Wichita State is going to be able to hit perimeter shots in bunches too. And so that's where the glass becomes so much more crucial. And it's where you really need to see a step up from this team because Wichita State right now is averaging 40.9 rebounds a game. DePaul's averaging 34.3. And that's with Brandon Macklin healthy.
Yeah, so just kind of going back to last year's game. I mean, Jacob Meyer 23 points, Isaiah Rivera 17 points, CJ Gunn 22. DePaul shot 17 of 33 from 3 in that game, and it was like one of those games where it's like, they put up 49 to 25. That's what they outscored Wichita State in the second half, 49-25. And this was a game where they were living and dying with the three, and they shot themselves right out of a cannon in that second half. And it's just like one of those things where it's like, where is it going to come from? The perimeter game could be there, but it's a different team than last year. I think one thing, like outside of Brandon Macklin, I think if Fabian Flores is going to play, I think that's huge. Because just again, it's hard to underestimate, a guy who's 7'2". It's just like one of those weird, quirky things where it's like the dude is just a monster. And like DePaul's defense played good against Morgan State. Like, don't get me wrong. But I was thinking to myself the other night, like, how much better could it have been with Fabian playing? Just given what he does, just, changing passing lanes and shooting lanes and just things of that variety.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, one of the last things I want to highlight with Wichita State before we wrap up here, because it's now getting to be 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night, and this episode is going to go out Friday, so you guys can't feel that right now, but the midnight
Let's
oil
talk
is starting
ball.
to kick in a little bit. I've been up since 5 a.m. today.
Really, same,
Excuse me.
same.
Will Berg at Wichita State. Sorry, I got some going on right now. Wichita State for Will Berg is 7'2" as well. So, if you combine the fact that Wichita State is winning the rebounding battle on average by about 6 a game over DePaul right now, or 6 rebounds a game over DePaul, obviously they've got a reliable 7-footer of their own. So for DePaul to be able to come out and be able to match them on the glass, you're going to need a guy like Fabian playing. So I don't know if maybe you see a little bit of Kaman in this game, because he did show you a little bit in terms of his rebounding ability and getting up and getting some blocks. I don't know. I don't know if Holtman's going to throw him out there. Will Berg is obviously going to be a major part of his matchup for Wichita State. And it's going to be interesting to see how DePaul can kind of, do their best to, in the potential absence of Fabian, do their best to match what he can do on the glass. Because most of the teams DePaul's played so far, save for Northwestern with Arrington Page, haven't really presented an overly, obviously Mike Nwoko for LSU was like very physical, but you haven't really played an overly tall center yet who's actually, got his legs under him other than Arrington Page. And by that point, Fabian was barely playing.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things as you're talking, I was trying to figure out how do I think this game is going to go. And like I keep going back and forth with kind of how Texas Tech went last year. Again, Wichita State goes on a crazy run early, gets the crowd on themselves, then DePaul just kind of settles down, and then they kind of fight their way back into the game. But then again, Texas Tech kind of runs away with it. I think that's very possible in this game, but I also think like this is a game that kind of has overtime written all over it. Um, just because again, I think DePaul and Wichita State, regardless of metrics, like I just think they're a pretty evenly matched matchup. Like I think like body for body, just guy for guy, it's relatively even. And when you get things like that, like you'll get your runs. Like, don't get me wrong, basketball, especially college basketball, is a game of runs. But also, like, can DePaul just find a way to capitalize on the momentum that they built Tuesday night and have that travel? Again, I don't really have an answer for that. Just Andy, simply because like they haven't done it this year. Again, we could talk about all the great things Destin was. Destin is not a road game at Wichita State. Like that's just the reality. Let alone an 11 a.m. tip.
No, for sure. The last thing I kind of want to point out is, there was a post on Twitter today, just saying is on some, account that does like bracketology, and we haven't really talked too much about the net, and I think that's something we'll save until Big East play comes around. But I just want to highlight this right now. DePaul was one of 7 teams, and 3 of them notably are from the Big East, that do not have a win outside of Q4 right now, which obviously, DePaul, I think you and I both agree, year 3 is where you have real tournament expectations. But in terms of the metrics real quick to look at this game, Wichita State is currently a Q1 road opportunity for DePaul, because 1 through 75 is where you get your Q1 road, and they're 70th in that right now. So even though winning this game would, just with Georgetown last year, by virtue you're destroying your own Q1 win by beating them, this is a real chance for DePaul to kind of, make a move in the metrics and just help the Big East out in general, where you can pick up a Q1 win on the road, even though it'll probably become Q2 by virtue of the victory. It'll help you out in a lot of ways. It'll help your confidence, help your metrics, and it'll help you feel good about going into that Big East gauntlet that, man, we'll get into it next week. But I mean, the cupcakes are over. Not that there were many cupcakes to begin with how a non-conference flowed, but you've got 21 games ahead of you, none of which are easy anymore at all. Like Morgan State to Wichita State could not be a more jarring, opposite ends of a spectrum where who knows how the game's going to go. You kind of hinted it could go to overtime. I happen to agree, but you don't really know how the game's going to flow, but you do know that you're not going to be playing teams anymore who are going to be shooting 2 of 28 in the first half. You're not going to be playing teams anymore who are going to turn the ball over 20 times unless you really force it. And even then, teams probably won't. So you're going to have to really, tighten things up, especially on the glass. And I think Saturday is going to be the first day we're going to have to see that from this team.
Yeah, I think you just kind of hit it on the head as we kind of went a little bit longer
11:02 p.m.
than we anticipated. I just stopped looking at the clock.
Yes, you do.
But I really think like this is a measuring stick game, regardless of what way it ends up on Saturday. This game will tell us more about DePaul than probably since the Northwestern game. Like
Yeah.
LSU, I didn't learn a whole lot. Like
Georgia
I
Tech,
learned
you didn't
again.
either, to be honest.
Yeah, right. So like I think that it's just one of those games where, this is a game that is the
This is a game.
measuring stick game that will tell us what the Big East conference schedule could look like. Because again, you're going to be playing in a lot of hostile environments in conference play, and this is a great first test to figure out what these Blue Demons are finally about.
Yeah, our next episode will be previewing Big East play. Finally, Big East basketball's in the air, man. 6 days from now at St. John's. Woof, that's going to be a tough one. But Nick, appreciate you joining me as always. We both got to get to bed for long day tomorrow before we end up watching UMass Lowell at Wintrust Arena for the first ever meeting between those two programs. We'll see if Katelynn Oxley plays. We'll tell you all about it next Tuesday. But until then, so long, everybody.
See ya.